Now, where were we? It's been a while since my last YouTube video. I think even a number of years rather than a number of months. Well, it's been that. It could have been a couple of years. The reasons for that are multiple, I guess. Mental health hasn't been that good, but I've also been doing other things. I'm now a publisher. But I'm going to talk about that in a video down the line. I'm going to be doing more videos, I think. This video, as you'll see, has been titled A Year of Reading Slowly. That year has not yet up, but I can tell you that I haven't even reached 50 books. Partly that's because there's an enormous amount of reading in my new work as a publisher, so I perhaps haven't been reading so much of my kind of hobby fiction, if you will, now, but it's actually because I've been trying to read slowly, and also very much for pleasure. Gone are the days where I will read sort of 2 or 3 books by a single author in one go, or on the bounce, as it were, or that I'm reading something I feel I ought to, etc. I've essentially, since the beginning of the year, or just prior to the beginning of the year, thought, well, I'm going to go to my bookshops and my bookshelves, and look at things that I haven't read. They've been there sometimes for decades. And so I've just picked stuff off the shelf, and sometimes I've revisited things that haven't read for a while and perhaps didn't get at the time. Rabbit Run by John Updike, I remember reading probably in my 30s, and not really understanding what the fuss is about, which is definitely not the case now. I was completely enthralled, and he's quite. I mean, what's so extraordinary about Updike is that, and he has his problems. Chauvinism, rather than sexism or misogyny, which could be laid at the grounds of other great writers of his generation, is one of them. But they were written at a particular time. These were written in the early 60s, or the Rabbit novels were written from the early 60s onwards. His sentence making, in terms of creating a visual image, is often extraordinary. But I'm going to talk about the kind of maybe the top 10 books that I read this year, or top 5 books on separate videos. I'm just saying. But Rabbit Run was an indication. Ian Foster's A Passage to India has been sitting on my shelf, I think, probably since my late teens, and I've never read it. That just knocked me over for its for to have scope, scale, and such levels of empathy. I think it's just astonishing. It really is a wonderfully. I mean, I'm not the first person to think it's his finest novel, but I mean, it really is a fine novel in the most kind of traditional sense. But also, I decided I just need. There are a few people that I haven't read that I keep hearing about, and feeling that I'm remiss in not having read them. So in a way, I am also catching up. Elizabeth Bowen is one of them, and the Heat of the Day, which I want to talk about at length, was brilliant. Although, in terms of title, it doesn't not much of it happens in the day, and it's not very hot. But I don't think it's actually to do with that. But anyway, that's my poor and joke. There was The Ginger Man, which is a novel written by J.P. Donnelly in the 50s, which I started, I think, at school, and didn't really get. I read other J.P. Donleavy, which I found hugely amusing and entertaining, and probably are incredibly modish now. Um, uh, Ginger Man, the Ginger Man, I mean, it's extraordinary. It actually sold, or has sold, 55 million copies. Think about that in terms of a book that is, expression of kind of high modernism. Um, uh, that will never happen again. Um, I mean, as a girl as a half form thing, a girl as a half form thing would be an expression of high modernism published in the last 10, 15 years. That's unlikely to sell a million copies in its lifetime. I mean, it's sold a lot, but it won't hit a million. 55 million. I mean, that is primarily because in 1955 there wasn't such explicit sex written in novels, and it was published by I can't remember. I know once again I might talk about that another time. And then I was just, for pure pleasure, reading books that I haven't read for 10 years that I absolutely loved, which I read with pure pleasure and love and care and wonder. Um, Amongst Women by John Gahern would be an example of that. So what does all this add up to? Not very much, in the sense that reading should be a pleasure. But if one goes onto social media these days and wanders around some of the people who talk about their book reading, you will start to see photographs of people's monthly book reading, and they will be, a stack of books. And one can only wonder the speed at which people are reading in order to complete those books, and the degree to which they're getting pleasure from them, i.e. there is a pressure on them to have a meaningful stack at the end of the month. And people read faster than I do, certainly, but is that really the point, to have a picture at the end of the month of a lot of books? It's not a race. No records need be held, although I suspect what's his name? Andy Miller will be the record holder. And in a way, he's the exception that proves the rule, because clearly he gets enormous amounts out of what he reads, and he reads more than most people, and he speaks as eloquently and as insightfully as anyone could. So, but generally, I feel that a beautifully written book, or a book well written, requires the respect of at least attention, which requires us going at the pace that the book is written to take you at, which means some books are going to take longer than others, not through length, but through the management of the rhythm. And also, I think, the space between books. I mean, I sometimes read a novel and I need at least 24 hours before I pick up the next piece of prose. I'm not, certain style, gets in and it works on you beyond the life of the reading, and then you have to let that go. You have to process it. You have to decompress. You have to let it, flow out of you to the degree that it does. I mean, stuff is held inside, but you throw it out of you in order to find the space to start to give the next one the kind of openness and generosity, and read it on its terms. And so, in this world where so much has to be consumed quickly and publicly, as it were, that 24 hours can seem like a waste of time, So there are many reasons for why I've gone for this reading public, but also I think partly because a bit like reading poetry, a bit like listening to some music, especially chamber music, I think my head was getting to the point where I wasn't able to take stuff in anymore in any meaningful way. Um, I just hadn't. There wasn't the space. There was too much white noise, cognitive strain. I hadn't let go of things in the way that I just spoke about. And so I had to take it down a gear. I had to kind of come down to first gear. Each time I want to read a book, I should be, it should be in neutral. If you want to use the metaphor of gears, it should be in neutral when you open up a book, and then the author is in charge of the gears. A good writer will be in charge of the gears. Where they start you. I mean, certain books, less so literary fiction, but it does happen, will start you, in a higher gear. But that's part of their job and part of what you have to allow a writer to do. Anyway, that's pretty much. It's mainly also all been fiction. I think probably 3 or 4 works of non-fiction over this year. I realised I'm now a fiction editor, and I've been reading quite a lot of non-fiction. But anyway, that's it. That's my first video in a number of years, and there will be more. And I hope you enjoyed it, etc., etc. And if you want to check out my new publishers, we've been going 2 years, as I said. We've published 5 novels and 1 work of non-fiction. We are called Weatherglass Books, and you will be able to find us at weatherglassbooks.com. And that's it for now. Thank you very much.